Thank you, Mr. President, for being with us again today on the Romanian television, the regional studio of Timișoara. We talked exactly 1 year ago about the first barometer on regions and cities. Now we have the second one, just very fresh, and I'm curious to tell me more about that. How much improvement do we have in the second barometer?
Well, the second barometer comes at a very crucial time for Europe. It comes right after the pandemic and the major crisis that we have, and right at the beginning of the recovery phase, which is starting in Europe. And it is true that in this barometer we see something very important. We see the scissor effect that the pandemic had for regions and cities all across Europe. And the figures speak for themselves. We have 180 billions of a gap in the finances of regions and cities. And I will give you more concretely the numbers. 125 billion euros was the increase of the expenditures for regions and cities in order to tackle the pandemic, and about 55 billion euros was the reduce in the revenues. This gives us the 180 billion gap, which we are now in need to cover in order to be able to provide the services to our people, to our citizens, all across Europe, in the 300 regions and 90,000 municipalities of Europe.
Is this, I understand, the main thing that the barometer shows? Which are the other very important things that you got as information within this barometer this year?
The other things that are of key importance is, I would say, the fact that the pandemic has cost a lot in our health systems, and that in order for us to work and be ready for future crises, is that we need to see how the competencies between all three levels of government, for example, European Union, member states and region cities, need to work, and since all having competencies, how we will organize it so as there is a coordination, a better coordination, and we don't find ourselves again caught by surprise. Of course, the crises were unprecedented, there is no question about this, but closing borders is not a solution to a problem. So what we need is to see how we can work together in collaboration and see how we can manage to have a more unified response. And of course, another issue that came out from our barometer is the digital divide that we see between rural and urban areas, but also between member states. And digital divide was very obvious during the pandemic because we saw how students could not study, how businesses could not function. We had unemployment rates increase because exactly of this digitalization that is poor in many countries. So if we take out 3 or 4 countries in Europe, like Belgium, like the Netherlands, then we see that there is really a lacking behind in the digital economy. And at the same time, we saw a very big difference between rural areas and urban areas. So this divide between countries and between rural and urban areas needs to be closed, needs to be shrinking.
Take Romania as an example, please. What can you tell me about Romania within this barometer?
Again, Romania has a very good standard, I would say, in urban areas, but is lacking behind in rural areas. And we see how we will take this divide and bring it to an end, because we cannot have citizens of 2 different dimensions. We need to have a unity and a cohesion in the digital economy.
You mentioned also yesterday that within this recovery policy there is no very much cooperation between the high-level politics, I mean the state politics, and the politicians on local level, and this is really very bad. And I know this is a battle that you at the Committee of the Regions do have all the time. What about these recovery policy funds, actually?
Yes, well, the recovery funds, if we want them to be successful and to tackle real issues and problems of the economies in Europe, need to go through regions and cities. Because regions and cities are the level of government with the most proximity to the real problems, the real issues, and the citizens. And so we know better where we need to stress and how we need to use these funds in order to recover our local economies. So when you see governments of some member states choosing not to incorporate regions and cities in this recovery phase, this is something that will create huge problems and could risk a failure of this recovery. If we want a quick recovery, if we want a solid recovery, and if we want a success in the recovery, we need to do this with the regions and the cities.
Are you working on this? How does it work at this moment? Because we are already talking about these recovery funds. They are already ordered, let's say. What is the next phase?
The next phase is to continue pressuring that the regions and cities take part in the implementation. Because in the design there was no time from some governments and they chose not to incorporate regions and cities' opinion, but at least in the implementation we need to envisage regions and cities so that these funds go and are allocated in specific needs of the people and real needs. Otherwise the recovery will not succeed.
You always talk about this three-dimensional Europe. We have the Commission on one part, we have the governments, and we have the local and regional authorities as a house that is building all the time. What did you see in this year, your first year as the president of the COR? Is this improving?
I see that more and more European leaders and more leaders of European institutions come to realize that this house, our European house of democracy, will not have a solid future unless these foundations are reinforced. So regions and cities have to play the role that they play in a house. They are the strong foundations on which member states, the walls and the roof, the European Union, can be. Otherwise, a house with no strong foundations will not last for long. And so we are here to give our hand to the European Union institutions, to the member states, and tell them that if you want to bring a real change in Europe, make the European Union more democratic and give the citizens the voice they want and make them feel that they are part of the decision-making process of the European Union, which affects everyone, you need the regions and the cities on board, because we are the actors who can bring Europe closer to its citizens.